Welcome to our Centennial celebration and conversation on the great Charlie Yardbird Parker with two of the most innovative artists in jazz today. We hope you enjoyed the beautiful solo concert by Braxton Cook. If you missed it, please visit the Harlem Stage YouTube page. I'm Monique Martin, Director of Programming, and it is my honor to welcome you to this conversation. Braxton Cook is a virtuoso alto saxophonist, uniquely talented vocalist, and songwriter whose sound blends jazz, soul, R&B, and alternative music into a fresh new sound all his own. He released his debut EP Sketch in 2014 and his sophomore release, Braxton Cook Meets Butcher Brown, in 2015. In April of 2017, Braxton released his debut album, Somewhere in Between. In 2018, he released his sophomore album entitled No Doubt. Braxton has performed in the Stretch Music Festival, curated by Christian Scott at Harlem Stage. He is one of our Fund for New Work Award recipients, and he's performed with his own band. Welcome back, Braxton, and thank you for that beautiful concert. Chief Christian Scott aTunde Adjuah began a 3-year artist residency at Harlem Stage in 2017, where he conducted arts education workshops, master classes for young professionals, curated festivals with artists who are advancing the jazz vernacular, co-curated discussions around film composition, visual arts, activism, and performed with his stellar band. He continues to expand on his trailblazing pace he has set since 2006 with his Grammy-nominated debut, Rewind That. Stretch Music, the inaugural recording of his genre blindness and sound. Rebel, Ruler Rebel, Diaspora, and the Emancipation Procrastination, collectively the Centennial Trilogy, who together collectively commemorate the 100th anniversary of the first jazz recording. On August 28th of this year, Christian released Axiom, a blistering set showcasing his stretch music group concept that was created during the beginning of the pandemic while he was in residence at the Blue Note here in New York. This March, right before venues were shuttered due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome back, Christian. Our moderator for this conversation is the brilliant leader and executive director of Harlem Stage, Patricia Cruz, who is an art fan, especially transformative jazz, and former performing artist, and always equity activist. I will now turn it over to you, Pat. Enjoy.
Thank you, Monique. And it's so good to be here with both Christian and Braxton again after having to close up the Harlem Stage Gatehouse as a consequence of safety measures and the issue around COVID. So, let me just begin by saying that one of the things that I've found in my own life is that art is what I live for. It is my life. And music has been a critical part of that. I started my career working with Henry Threadgill, Anthony Braxton. So I've been on the cutting edge of avant-garde jazz for many, many years. And I had to go back to kind of listen for the first time to the music that preceded that part of the avant-garde, because we're talking about a stretch of music that is over a century old. And I think one of the things that we found, and as Charlie Parker, we've just celebrated 100 years of his life. One of the things that I think about is, in history, one looks at the kind of great man theory or great woman theory of history, and who were the folks, the innovators who took us from part A to part B. And frequently, with a whole pantheon of many brilliant artists who have played this music over the years and in different places, there's always this idea of, okay, who was it that changed us? Who was it that took the music in a different direction? And it seems to me, certainly, that Charlie Parker is one of those individuals. And even if you don't believe in that theory, and I don't know that I do, it is a theory and one can buy into it or not. But for me, the idea is, what role, how would you place Charlie Parker in the enormous and incredibly significant history of this music, which has been called jazz? Let me just say two things before you answer. I want to acknowledge that Christian actually introduced Braxton to Harlem Stage, if I'm not mistaken. And I want to thank him and acknowledge that, because he's brought in many artists that I would not necessarily be aware of, but that I'm learning all of the time from. So there's that. And then I want to say, one of the other things that's so important about this evening is that we are on the eve of an incredibly significant election. And I can't have this conversation without acknowledging that and indicating to everyone who is listening on this call or elsewhere to say, if you haven't voted, shame on you. There is tomorrow, and that's it. So with that, talk to me about that kind of the place that both of you hold Charlie Parker. And I'm going to begin with you, Christian, since I knew you first. Whatever that means.
Yes, ma'am. And I am, I'm constantly in a space of bowing to you, for what it is that you have built. Obviously, I know we're here to talk about, Charlie Parker's incredible legacy, but the things that you have been able to accomplish and to build in this space, to give me the opportunity to introduce a person like Braxton, right? It's also something that I think, we don't speak about enough. So I am bowing to you. And I also want to thank Mrs. Martin, who introduced us as well, for all of the incredible work that she has done over the years as well. So for me, I think, Bird kind of starts a little different for me than maybe a lot of musicians. So, it was a tactic of, my grandfather and the elders in my household when I was a little boy, to put on Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie records as a means of keeping my twin brother, Kyle, and I from jumping all over the furniture. Right? So my introduction to Charlie Parker is actually with a song called Salt Peanuts that he and Dizzy Gillespie put together. And there's actually pictures of my brother and I sitting on the couch in my grandmother's den. And what we would do is, my granddad would allow us to kind of, go nuts when Salt Peanuts went on. But in order to freak out, you had to listen through the entire record and be disciplined and, stay in your seat and really listen to and pay attention to what you were listening to. But when Salt Peanuts came on, you were kind of allowed to sort of free up a little bit, So some of the sort of seated memories that I have kind of begin with listening to that music. As I started to play more and, eventually, obviously, I became more serious. I started to play with my Uncle Donald Harrison, who is one of the most stellar alto men in this generation of the music. And so it was also of great import to him that I knew Charlie Parker's music, what's strange about it is I think as a person that's born when I'm born, most kids learn in New Orleans, you kind of start with like Louis Armstrong, right? And you move your way through, but because he was an alto man, Charlie Parker was really one of the first people that I studied. It's sort of like Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, and Clifford Brown were kind of all in tandem. And but in terms of his legacy, it's really difficult to find to really put a place on what it is that he contributed, right? Because some people would argue that his contribution is as paramount to what it is that we do now as what Bach contributed, right?
Yeah.
But to be completely honest with you, Charlie Parker is also a person that is born in an era where there are all these impediments to progress, right? And so for him to be able to contribute the things that he did in the context that he contributed them in is also very telling. I think you would be, you'd have a lot of work in front of you to find a soloist that precedes him with the type of fluidity and sort of dynamicness that he possessed in his playing. His compositional acumen is something that forced everyone to sort of update what it was that they were contributing. And he was also able to create a canon in this music that pretty much from that point until what is existing now, I think it'd be very difficult for someone to make an argument about music actually getting past what it was that they developed. So that's also a huge component of it. Braxton will tell you, when he joined the band, what was so dynamic to me about his playing, and I was immediately floored with, every night we were playing, I just wanted to pick him up and squeeze him because he had his bebop together. And for folks that play this language, you understand that it is very difficult for you to communicate the full range of what a person is actually experiencing in a jazz context if you haven't put your hands, heart, and ear onto bebop. And so, you're seeing the remnants of his contribution in this conversation. When you look at a person like Braxton Cook, or you're looking at a person like me, you are also looking at the descendants of that incredible legacy.
Right. Braxton, why don't you talk a little bit about how
Sure.
you came to hear Charlie Parker and what influence that had on you?
Absolutely. Well, firstly, hopefully my connection is okay with my internet connection. Let me know if there's anything weird, okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So, for me, I mean, as an alto player, Charlie Parker is pretty much everything for me. I heard Charlie Parker the first time, I'd say maybe 12 or 13, right? 13, end of middle school, going right into high school. It wasn't Salt Peanuts, but I think it was Now's the Time for me. Like, Now's the Time, and then Confirmation.
Yeah.
Confirmation might have been the first solo where I just was floored by just the architecture. And then when I was visually able to study it, it took it to another level. I didn't realize how much of a visual learner I guess I was, but when I got the Omnibook, which is essentially a book of transcriptions, right? They have note for note transcriptions of what Charlie Parker plays.
Right.
It's the Bible essentially for a jazz saxophonist, right? It's like everything in there. It's just perfect. The voice leading everything that he plays. So I remember very early on kind of studying that, listening to Confirmation and trying to play along and mimic his playing, right? And then shortly thereafter, I ended up getting a private teacher, that helped me to study his music even deeper and really understand the voice leading, understand bebop. And I don't know, from that point on, it's just always really been a part of my playing. I would say Cannonball as well, kind of in tandem. For me at 13, 14, the hardest part was getting past the fidelity, I think, of the recording. There are a lot of live recordings of Charlie Parker, right? Like you take Massey Hall, for example, very famous, Dizzy Gillespie, amazing recording. But at 13, I'm so used to hearing music that just sounded so mixed and clean, I think.
Yeah.
I remember just gravitating towards a lot more of Cannonball's recordings because he was just he recorded a lot later into the 50s and 60s and the recording quality was just cleaner. And honestly, it wasn't until a little bit later in high school where I started checking out more of the live Charlie Parker recordings. The things that you don't necessarily find in the Omnibook. A lot of the Omnibook is the classic Dial recordings and Savoy recordings.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of live stuff where Charlie Parker just goes in that honestly, he's playing some more alto than most people are playing now still. You know what I mean? Like live, Fats Navarro. It's there's some incredible recordings. So I started getting into that later into high school. And that's when I discovered okay, Bird's actually got it all. That's it. And
that's great information. Now, is the Omnibook the same as what was called a fake book? Is that
two different things? The fake book is actually referencing the jazz standards. So that's more so if you wanted to learn If I Were a Bell, or you want to learn, I don't know, My Favorite Things, or classic jazz standards, and you want to learn them. That the real book refers more to the sheet music of classic tunes. A lot of them were show tunes, Broadway tunes, Sondheim, whatever. You know what I mean? Omnibook is like solo transcriptions of solos that Charlie Parker played.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
way more advanced, if that makes sense.
No, it does, absolutely. And I know some of these things from my engagement with different musicians over the years. But it's interesting to me because I think that, at least for me, and I consider myself a jazz fan.
Yes, ma'am.
An aficionado, perhaps, but somebody who has listened to it for just about forever. But I had to start with things that were more accessible because Charlie Parker was not the music that I first gravitated toward. And I was listening to the avant-garde, I was listening to Braxton and a couple of other musicians who were my contemporaries.
Yes, ma'am.
So Charlie Parker was something that I didn't really understand, and I have to give credit to Phil Schaff. And I don't know.
Sure. He taught me too when I was in school.
Oh my God. I listened to Phil Schaff every morning on Bird Flight at 9:30. It kept me from getting to work.
He knows every detail about every recording.
Exactly. So I
Down
was
to what they were wearing. It's crazy. Yeah.
I couldn't leave my house because at 9:30 Bird Flight came on, and it was just like I'd get out of the house when I could. But I learned so much about that material, and that music, but at the same time, it was hard for me to hear it because it's so complicated.
Sure.
And I wonder, especially about young listeners, about young musicians who are entering that music for the first time and trying to figure out what their point of entry is now. And perhaps you can speak about that.
I can definitely speak to that. But okay, I didn't start at Cannonball or Charlie Parker like at 5, 6 years old, for example. You know, I made my way there through Grover Washington Jr., for example. More of a contemporary saxophonist, still someone that I thought bridged the gap nicely between like R&B, pop, and jazz. But like, yeah, I heard maybe just the two of us, right? Bill Withers or something like that on the radio. Or I would hear Michael Brecker playing on a Cameo record, you know, like Candy or something like that. Or he played in a lot of Parliament records, right? Kirk Whalum's and stuff like that. So my parents, you know, I wouldn't say they're necessarily musicians or anything like that, right? They grew up listening to soul music, Motown. That was always kind of in our household. Right. And a lot of that music, while there are horns, I wouldn't say they're taking like long 3-minute jazz solos, no? Right? You know what I mean? Like Junior Walker, like Shotgun. That song is like, there's a saxophone solo on there, but it's not, you know what I mean? So I was checking that out, I believe, like early stages between like 6 to like 10 years old, for example. Yeah. And I was learning R&B and I'm studying that. And then through there, you know, I don't remember at what point Wikipedia came out, but that's when I started deep diving on Grover Washington and Michael Brecker and their influences. So I find like through Michael Brecker, I find Sonny Rollins and Coltrane, blah, blah. And then, you know, through Grover Washington Jr., I discovered Cannonball Adderley. And then through Cannonball Adderley, I discovered Charlie Parker. Yeah. And that's, you know, 12, 13, that's when that started for me. And there's no going back. You find the source, you know. I didn't start there, but I found my way there. So to answer your question, an entry point, I think there's a lot of R&B and gospel and other forms of music that still incorporate a lot of those elements of jazz and like still have the elevated harmony and voice leading and all of those elements. And through that, you will discover, you know, you'll find your way to. Yeah.
And there's some very difficult harmonic conventions and breaking of those conventions that Charlie Parker was engaged in, as well as the rhythmic, and to be able to penetrate both of those things at the same time through one musician, one instrument is tough stuff. You know, it's like listening to Bach. Christian, you have a more privileged, I think, position because you've come up in a world in which the music was critical and an essential part of your beginnings. Can you talk about how you went from what you knew most to learning about Charlie Parker and how that, in addition to chilling unsalt peanuts?
Yeah, no, you know, it's the thing about growing up in the kind of environment that I grew up in is that, you know, bebop is like the in New Orleans, that's like the, you know, the later on music. That's like the, you know, that's, oh, the young guys are playing that. And you're like, this guy's been dead for 50 years, you know?
Right.
But it's that kind of, even when the older musicians who are much younger than those men, right, are speaking about it, they speak of it as an extension to what came out of New Orleans. So, you know, when you learn to play the music in that ecosystem, you learn in canon, right? So it's, even though I was listening to Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie as a 2-year-old, the moment I got my first trumpet, they're gonna sit down with you and say, okay, you gotta deal with Joe Oliver, you gotta deal with Freddie Keppard, you gotta deal with Louis Armstrong, you gotta deal with Sidney Bechet, you gotta deal with Louis, you know, so you're literally in a space where you have to go in order. So I think what was great about learning in that way is that by the time you get to bebop, it makes sense. So
that's great.
Most people's, you know, if you're growing up in you know, your normative environment in America, you don't have the same type of traditions where it's like when I'm a little boy, like the guy that delivered the mail or the milkman, and yes, we did have those in New Orleans when I was a kid, they could play Donna Lee on a trumpet or a cornet. So it also wasn't like you could pitch a rock and hit a great musician that also had that kind of information because of what the environment is, right? Because I'm growing up in a space where you can't tell, specifically, you can't tell the young African-American men in that reality that they can't be musicians because the airport is named Louis Armstrong, right? So it's a different context. And so by the time I got to what Bird and Diz were doing, even as a young musician, 11, 12 years old, I could hear the synergy between what Charlie Parker was playing and what Lester Young played. I could hear the connections in that, right? I could hear Don Bias. I could hear those players in his playing as well. So it wasn't, I was riveted by it and captivated by it, but it wasn't something that seemed like it came out of nowhere because, you know, what you intimated earlier when you talked about your experience and, you know, how you started it, you know, and some of the musicians that you were around. I think one of the things that we don't talk about is the fact that, you know, we anoint musicians. That's a very common thing to say, this person, that person. I've been the beneficiary of that kind of energy, and so has Braxton in this new moment. But at the end of the day, it is always a continuation of something that a collective of people are doing, right? And
yes, I would totally agree.
And so it wasn't as amazing as his voice was to me. It did not, I was not reacting to it in a way where it was like he was on an island. He was just another one of our fathers, right? It wasn't until I got to Berkeley and environments like that where also, to be completely honest with you, certain musicians that come out of our cult, there's a romanticism that's sort of in fetishization that's kind of tied into their life narratives and also some of the trappings and things that, you know, they may have endured in their lifetimes that for outside cultural perspectives, when they're looking at those things, those are the stories that they want to project, right? And so those, I think it was a confluence of all of those things. But in my musical infancy, it was, you know, he was just another one of those fathers.
Yeah.
Can I add to just something he said that was super important? In addition, to your point about like the lineage and of like who Charlie Parker really is, like this idea of community, not only, you know, vertically, but like horizontally as well. I feel like in his time period, it's like there's more to Bird and bebop than just what Charlie Parker's playing, right? Like you just said, we always mention Dizzy, but it's like what Fats contributed, what Thelonious Monk contributes, like it's like all these people are in the band with like the rhythmic aspect of it as well. It's like, you know, some of that stuff, like obviously you don't get in the Omnibook, and we'll get into that, but like I think like what Max Roach contributes to this music, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What Charles Mingus contributes, it's like everybody was helping to shape an entire language, an entire style. And that's super important. It's kind of larger than the one and larger than the individualistic kind of concept. It's a bit bigger than that, and I think that's super important.
And also, you know, just to piggyback off of you piggybacking. This is our, you know, we go.
What we do.
But I think what's also really important to mention and to be clear about is that those musicians, those men were also intentional about what it was that they were building because of what they were experiencing. right?
Sure.
So when you're enduring a reality where you walk out of your home and you are automatically persona non grata, it also becomes a very important thing to build things of your own. And so when you read Monk's writing and you read what Mingus is saying, or you look at these interviews and you're auditing these spaces, you know, they are saying that they wanted to build something that no one else could do and that hadn't existed in the history of music. Like
The
we talk,
intentionality, you're absolutely right.
right? And so it's like, you know, there's a piano behind me. We talk about the well-tempered system and its ability to rivet, right? But it's a completely different situation. Like people mention figured bass and all those things as means of improvising and that preceded some of these contributions. But at the end of the day, for those men to be able to, no matter what the harmonic reality was, no matter what key it was, no matter what tinge you wanted to put on it culturally, no matter what speed it was, they could instantaneously improvise and create things where they were not only playing what was literally there, but could also pull from all of these other contexts and build at breakneck tempo. So, you know, it's also really difficult to talk about this stuff without being clear that this was also a group of young Black men that were also saying, this is the reality that we're enduring, but we can carve something out for ourselves and contribute something that the world has never seen before. And to also do it in a way where generations on generations can come behind that and look at it. And like you're saying, the Omnibook, you can go and look at, let's say, maybe a well-tempered document, right, from a few hundred years ago, and the Omnibook, and you look at that and it's what's going on in this space in real time. We're not sitting about a man sitting down for 40 days and working that out. It's just, it's happening when it's happening. So I think it's really important to also be clear about how they contributed, what they contributed, and what the intention was when they were contributing.
You're absolutely right, man. That's so true.
I love the conversation because you've pointed out that it's not necessarily the individual, but the group. And that environment that is self-created too. I mean, they come together with intentionality and their creations are a part of that intention. And their invention is both brilliant, but it's also reliant upon other brilliant minds coming together to form a creation, which is different. You know, it's not like an individual artist making a painting like my husband did. So he was working individually in a space in a studio and having certainly to rely on history and looking at the history of art and making it within that context, but it was this individual creation. What you're talking about is this group invention that is done completely. I mean, the invention is the spontaneity of it, but it's based with all of that knowledge and the skill that allows spontaneity to occur is what's incredible. So what I want to do is, because I know we've got a limited time and I think we're going to be engaging with some audience, some questions from our listeners. But if you were to say what the impact of that invention is on your music, I'd like to hear that from both of you.
Well, for me, you know, I think the communal aspect of what it is that we do is the most important aspect of what we do. And I know, you know, Braxton can attest to this from being in this band and being in that environment. You know, we are real, you know, we have our own intentions as well, you know. You know, and that's also what's fun about it. It's one of the things that I think, you know, fostered the necessity to sort of codify the music as also being America's music, classical music, if we want to use those sort of terms. But it's because it's such a democratic process to create, right? And, you know, because even if you think about our band, you know, and I think what's been great about these groups over the years is that all of the players are also bebop players, right? So, you know, when I look at our group, you know, even when the time when Braxton was there, you know, you think about some of the personalities that were there, and it being designed that way for a reason. You know, it's like we have Lawrence Fields in our band, who is naturally a contrarian, as am I, depending on, you know, the weather. And so, you know, it fosters it, you know, every night there are things that you don't know what's going to show up. And it's the same as conversations. You know, we may get on a flight, you know, from the Czech Republic to, you know, to Shanghai and talk about reparations and the necessity for that. And maybe someone's saying, you know, well, no, I don't think this, or any of those things. And then you get on the bandstand and you hear that negotiation continuing in that environment. So, you know, I don't think I could have created a musical environment, you know, like the one that we created without also being able to reference what it is that they did and how they did it, not just musically, but also in terms of, you know, the way that you build a band is also a byproduct of the artist's mind, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that you're putting, you know, this story doesn't get said much, but even how Braxton joined the band, like I didn't hear him play first. You know, we met at Symphony Space. After the gig was over, we started to talk and just hang out, and he was so brilliant. I mean, the things that he was saying and what he was intimating in that moment, what he picked up on, he realized, I'll never forget this. He realized that, you know, the stage, no one struck the stage. So we had to break down this equipment and do all of these things. And he asked me if I needed some help. Now, it wasn't even my band. And I said, yeah, sure, you know, come and help us. And so we started to break the things down in the talk. And I'll never forget this. The next day, I got a call from Glenn Ballard to do a recording session for, you know, some work, which ended up being a television show that got picked up on Netflix, The Eddie. And he says, do you have an alto man? And I had never heard Braxton play, but I was so floored by his observations, you know, and how he was navigating the space, how he was reacting to his peers, the things that he was intimating. So I said, well, you know, I think there's a guy, give me a couple hours and let's see if we can get him out to Los Angeles. I had flown out that next morning. So I called Braxton up, asked him if he had some time he wanted to make this session. And so he flew into Los Angeles the next day, showed up and beat the hell out of us on all of that music. Now, mind you, I had never heard him play, but he showed up and he was the lion in the room. And so the point is that what is going on with these instruments is always an extension of this muscle, right? Yeah. And so it's important, you know, obviously, to when you're looking at what those men contributed to also deal with that, because we don't talk about that so much. But the environments that we create now are akin to those spaces, and that you are also looking for people that have really, really dynamic minds, because that creates dynamic music.
Right, right.
It's beautifully said. That's exactly how I feel. I'm like, it's funny now, Christian, like being in LA in this moment,
right,
at the same age. And when I met you, I think you had just either gotten married or something.
Yep.
And you're like, I'm out in LA, blah, blah, blah. I'm taking months off on touring. I'm working on this television stuff. And I think you might have been 29. Like it's wild. I'm like in a similar moment. I'm 29 out here, and I'm like, it has me thinking about how I want to give back and how I want to create, you know, something larger than what it is I'm already doing, and the like you said, the minds and the people that I want to have around me, the team that I'm trying to create, is super important, and the intention that we all have about the music and sound that we're trying to create. These are things I'm thinking about a lot more now than I wasn't thinking about so much at 21. But I'm like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a very full circle moment for me, and I'm like, I think, you know, to your point, like Charlie Parker, obviously on the instrument is absolutely a huge influence, but more than that, you know, when I think about the contribution,
you want to have a conversation with
exactly. That's all I want, you know. Yeah, I want like-minded individuals that are like connected on a purpose, that are trying to build something that hasn't been here before, and we're trying to push this thing forward, absolutely, in our own way.
I had the real privilege, through a number of associations with musicians, of meeting and hanging out with Max Roach. Oh. And Max was the first person that I thought to honor at Harlem Stage.
Wow.
And it was an amazing experience. And we fought through the whole thing. I mean, it was just like one battle. And you know, this is my idol, but it didn't stop me from saying, no, you can't do that, or I'm gonna do this. But there was this incredible, I mean, he was so brilliant. And when I hear the music in retrospect, I think, oh my God, how crazy was I to try to battle this guy over stuff that may or may not have been relevant, but it was relevant to me at that time. Mm-hmm. But I've just been very blessed. And I had the opportunity to hear Monk live. And that was just like, oh my God. My husband and I went and heard him at a club in Harlem. I'm not remembering the name of the club, but we came up, we were living downtown, we came up to hear Monk. And Monk was on the bandstand playing. And when he came down for a break, mm-hmm. and the club was packed, I mean, we were like in embrace, right? He walks off the bandstand and everybody made room for him to walk off, as treating him as the royalty that he was. It was just like, make room for this giant. And for me, the music has so, I say to many people that without this music, I can't, you know, it's very hard. And I know you all know that even better than I as Black men, to walk through this world with dignity, because every moment that we exist and walk out into the world, that dignity is threatened. And for me, this music has brought me an undeniable dignity that I can move through the world and say, we did something that nobody else can do. And it's a point of pride and a point of achievement and a point of the reflection of our brilliance, one, and our humanity. So as we look at that, I just want to kind of understand how you all have been affected, not so much in your musical life, because you've talked about that a bit, but you can talk about that again, but how it affects you as you move through the world, especially as human beings, as brilliant men who are frequently not considered as who you actually are and what that means. So
I'm going to jump in here, you know,
okay.
Because when you speak about, you know, Monk leaving the bandstand and sort of the reverential reaction to that and everyone partying,
yeah,
he was a king, right? And I think, you know, we also have to, you know, stop having such linear ideas about what that is, right? This is a person that earned that kingship or that sort of energy as a sovereign through his actions, yeah. Right? And through a real commitment to sound. You know, you speak about Max Roach. You know, when I first moved to New York, I had the same lawyer as Max Roach. And so, you know, Kenneth Ramsher and Owen Lamb and, you know, and so there were all of these moments and, you know, he always referred to himself as a sonic architect. You know, people that look at my records will see that, you know, terminology is on these records because, you know, these were people that also understood that part of what their mandate was to also move and change perspectives, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, and I don't think, you know, that energy is lost on Braxton and I. You know, we've had a myriad of conversations about, you know, that energy. But, you know, I think what's really amazing and dynamic about what it was that they contributed is, it is a pillar that allows you to, in a musical landscape, look at how frighteningly intelligent these people are. Yeah. And you have the ability to see that, then you also should be smart enough to know that there are correlatives in every other thing, every other exhibition, right? And so, you know, here are a group of men that to the average person, you know, in a certain space, depending on which cultural group you come from in 1947, you're looking at this person and thinking all of these potentially pejorative and belittling things.
Right.
But when you walk into that room, you realize that this person is the genius that is in the space. And so that energy is also not lost on us. You know, I'm a person that has sort of had my moments with the press and with pundits, you know, that react in certain ways because it is uncomfortable for them to look on the bandstand, which is essentially a mirror, and to see someone there that is also completely aware of the fact that they have power and that they can take agency in making change and affecting and shifting perspectives. Right. But I think, you know, when we're looking at what it was that those guys did, they did it in a moment where you can make an argument that none of the, you know, most of the resources that Braxton and I enjoy did not exist yet. So it's their valiantness and their bravery and their willingness to stand and to say that we can communicate whatever it is that we want to communicate. You know, when Charles Mingus says, you know, baby doesn't want any, you know, shortening bread, my baby wants caviar, and my baby wants diamonds and pearls. You know, that can be, you know, a frightening thing for certain people to process, especially if their sort of cultural imperative is wrapped around making sure that a person from that cultural space never has those things, right? Right. But at the end of the day, what these people are actually doing in their music is they're claiming something. They're also intentional about reclaiming things. And so those energies are not lost on us. We walk through that every day, but I'm not a person that's going to, you know, ever react to those things like a woe, this is a woe is me and what I'm going through, because I'm also a person that is connected to the people that preceded me, and I know their stories and their narratives as well. So yeah. Things are okay. We're just pushing through our moment of fighting. That's all.
Right. And let me just allow you to answer that, Braxton, but Monique has a question that's come up in the chat that I want us to take as well. Braxton, did you want to take that, or
the question in the chat first, or what?
Yeah, we can. What do you
go
to your what?
Oh, I can just finish up on what Christian was saying real quick, because I just he said a few things in there that were really, really interesting. I think one, I don't know, I know you don't want to gas yourself up, Christian, but I do think, you know, spending about 5-6 years in Christian's group, there are a lot of times I've witnessed Christian's just fearlessness, and I know a lot of that stems from his connection to his history. He's emboldened by the fact that his people have come through so much. Yeah. You know, and being around that energy, you can't help but have that just kind of inspire you. And you know, in years that I've been outside the group, it's something I think about and lean on a lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think there's it's funny, just to bring it back to Charlie Parker, this is something I've been thinking about, but there's this really dope video where they play Hot House, and it's Bird, it's Dizzy Gillespie. I think it's 1951, and they get this Downbeat Award. And if you just watch how Bird is carrying himself, and the manner in which they're introduced, the guy's a little snubs him a little bit, and just how Bird just kind of glares at him with this energy, bro. It's like, oh man, you got to watch this video. It says a lot, and it's just like there's so many instances like that. Charles Mingus, Miles videos where they really don't give a fuck, you know. And it's like in that time, like it's the 50s. That could be it. They could walk out the back and that's it. You know what I mean? It's like Miles have been abused by cops. It's wild. Go ahead, Christian.
What I was really, you know, hated about that video was, you know, he referred to these men as boys.
It's a boy. Right.
And you can immediately see the turn from Bird in that moment, because it's, you know, and this person doesn't have anything to do if he's not covering Charlie Parker.
Right.
You know, and so the thing is, it's, you know, I know part of what you spoke about, Braxton, and part of what you saw, I think a big part of that is also, I'm a person that learned that you can create courage.
Yeah.
Through doing and through
yourself, and also having real lines. And at the end of the day, you know, these were men that were able to do that in a space also musically, because Braxton, as practitioners, we talk about this all the time.
All day.
people, maybe outside of that energy may not know this, but it's, the jazz word gets thrown around a lot. I am a person that believes that there may be 70 to 100 actual jazz musicians.
Yeah.
But that's obviously something that comes as an extension of my pedigree in the environments that I grew up in, understanding that that is a language and a culture and it has its own, rites of initiation, nomenclature, all of these things. So when you're in an environment that basically says anyone that plays a saxophone or a guitar and that says they like jazz is automatically assumed to be that, it also has a sort of byproduct of that is to think that what people like Charlie Parker are doing is actually something that most people can get to. And I always say that, and it's not, and I don't mean that in a negative way. What I mean is it's the time commitment and the sacrifice. Yeah. Most people, I think all human beings have the capacity to create beautiful music. Obviously, our musical platform is built around genre blindness and everyone's cultural way of practicing music being equally as valid. But the point that I'm making is that when you speak about what it is that these guys are doing, most people are not going to commit 20, 30, 40,000 of hours into being able to play a 64 note passage at 300 BPM over Cherokee, right? So when someone that does not have that mindset or hasn't, sharpened those things also calls you a boy, it also brings up all of those things, and you can see that energy in that interview. And it's like, when you listen to what they're playing, you can hear it's the fire sound. Like they could have played in the cut, that, you and I know that. But you could tell there was also something on their mind when they were saying what it was that they were saying. So it's a video that I recommend everyone watch.
Yeah, let me just say that I don't think we should shy away from the term genius.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because I think that is an important thing to be able to claim.
Right.
And we don't frequently claim it, and we shouldn't frequently use it. Right. But I think certainly when one talks about Charlie Parker, and you're talking about genius and those men, when you look at the people that you've referenced, whether it's Mingus or Max. So I think that's an important aspect of our claiming our heritage, and however we conceive that heritage, whether it's as directly as you were able to get to it, Christian, because of your family and your background. I think that for me, again, that was the thing that allowed me to move through the world with dignity, because I recognized that genius and I claimed it not for myself, but for my group. This was a part of who I am. So there is a question that came through the chat, and I want to allow that to be answered. And the question is, what are some of the distinctions between moving through the USA, as we've talked about doing, and then going through Europe, the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, as Black men and artists? If you can both speak to that briefly.
We've gone through, all over the world together, literally. I can think of some very specific places with Christian,
Yeah, I think, if we're being completely honest about it, I think Black people, it's a very strange thing being a world citizen as a Black person.
Yeah.
Because you can see the varying degrees of bias. You feel them, you feel, being persona non grata in so many different kinds of environments. Even in environments where you may be the majority because of the type of colonial conditioning that has existed in those spaces, that also doesn't allow you to see your own as your own, right? And I think, that's a very specific walk, that a lot of people don't really go through. But I think as a musician, if we're being clear about that, there's sort of another energy, in America, so much of what it is that we contribute, is sort of seen through like the lens, like a status lens, right? So it's like, if you get a look or a certain type of press, then it automatically means you are great and, and all of these things. And one of the things that I've always enjoyed about also performing in Africa or performing in Asia or performing in Europe and South America is that the listening public is really more curious and more sort of invested in whether or not you actually can do the thing. They're listening. And it's the truth, right? And there are levels to this, just like there are levels to everything else, right? At the end of the day, like, yes, one guy may put on gloves and tie him up and get in a ring and throw his hand, and you can say he's a boxer, but that guy is also a far cry from Muhammad Ali. There are levels, right?
Yeah.
And so what was always, just to kind of steer in a positive direction, I think what's always been great is not just moving around as a New Orleanian musician, but also a musician that comes from our larger Black American culture, is that there is a reverence that exists for those characters when they go into those environments, strictly because of the legacies that we are talking about now. And that when someone from another culture, be it Brazil or if they're from, the Czech Republic, when they listen to someone like Charlie Parker play, it is also clear to them that at that time there was nothing like that existed. It's the Muhammad Ali level. And so, and so even in this moment now where the music is enjoying a resurgence and there's a lot of popularity, around a lot of artists, and Braxton can tell you this, is I'm always really clear with younger developing artists about not getting caught up in those energies, because at the end of the day, when, once you've made the record, it exists forever, and people will be able to go back and to level that record against other things that have existed. So it's the process that's important, the process, and falling in love with the process of becoming, the best version of yourself that you can be. And so I think most of our travels, more often than not, our conversations revolved around that. So even if we were enduring or going through things where you could say, well, that person clearly has a bias, or this person is bigoted, or, and has these ideas, what was amazing, just like in terms of the reaction of that Downbeat magazine, auditor, this person sitting there in their space telling them that they're boys. It's always, an amazing thing to be able to step on the bandstand and to set the record straight. And so those are the things that I enjoyed about those moments, no matter where we were.
Great. Braxton, you want to talk on that?
I mean, he kind of hit every point. I'm not gonna lie. I'm like, that's pretty true. Something that I guess maybe you didn't talk about so much is like how actually United States playing here is actually one of the more multi-layered kind of experiences, depending on where you are.
Right.
That's actually been the most interesting. I think 2015 was our largest US tour, Christian, when you dropped Stretch Music. And we actually did like a West Coast, a East Coast, and then the Midwest stretch. That was just really interesting and eye-opening to play jazz and play. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like to play this music, that was very eye-opening in a lot of ways. I don't know. I don't know if it's it's weird to say, but it's like, do we value the music as much here? I don't get that vibe. I don't get that feeling.
Right.
When pretty much everywhere else all over the world, like the music will speak for itself, and it helps to equalize things a bit. Yeah. But I can't say that for when we play all over this.
That's also something that how I am, Braxton.
I know you are.
Is really clear about the designs that move in this space, because Mrs. Cruz, when you spoke about when you walked into this music and your awareness of it, the music that was being created in that moment, I talked about the codification of jazz as being America's classical music, but there is also some destructive energy in those lines as well, right? This is something that is happening in a moment where you look at artists like Ornette Coleman and artists like Don Cherry, and they are starting to tether the music and to expand the music into spaces that sonically relate more to their actual ancestry. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, you could see that there was an intention in terms of the pundits and the folks that were writing about this stuff, which was complete conjecture, I always have this thing where it's like, you look at what the writers are writing at the time, and now we laud John Coltrane, but in 1967, 64, they were calling him anti-jazz, right?
Yeah.
And so the music was actually expanding into a space where it was starting to come home to its home energy in spaces.
Yeah.
Then you have this intention to codify it as being, by definition, equal parts European harmony and West African rhythm, which is to say that they are not harmonic traditions in Africa, which is like, we can walk around Bamako and you will hear things in every space that you walk into that sounds frighteningly similar to Robert Johnson and Lightning Hopkins and the blues. And so
it's the fallacy,
and so I think one of the things that we have to be really clear about as well, another one of my themes, is also why it was important to frame the music in that way and when it happened, right? Because this is a moment where it's becoming blatantly obvious that this music is actually more connected to the languages it comes from rather than being bogged down by the well-tempered system. And then in that moment where it was sort of decolonializing its own space and it's self-emancipating, then the definition and the stamp of, well, no, this is exactly what it is, versus it being expansionist music.
And that we talk about a lot.
Right, and we talk about that a lot in all of those spaces because we were also
classic era of jazz. There was a need to try and all right, we got to call this something, and we have to market this, and we have to try and. But it's like it was actually heading in a direction that was like you said, really tapping back into the source.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that art is always defeated, dissembled by marketing.
Right.
And
art and commerce, sure.
You always have to find a box, and the box doesn't necessarily define the artist's intent. And I have done this for a long time, and when I would introduce certain artists as jazz artists, they were like, no, I don't do jazz.
Right.
And I was like, so there was this denial because it was seen as something less than. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and to be able to look at you all, the two of you, there's no all here, but to look at, that's my kind of Southern Chicago roots coming out. But I think that what's critical for the two of you is certainly to define the music that you make. And maybe it doesn't need words, it just needs the making. Because I think that is its own assertion. And I think art is frequently defeated by that idea of labeling. So I think what I'm gonna do is give each of you an opportunity to say 1 minute worth of stuff because they're getting me off of here. So.
30 seconds, real quick then.
Okay.
I mean, one of the things I've gleaned, I guess, from this conversation is that the importance, one, in tapping into the source of where this really comes from.
Yeah. Tapping
into our own intentionalities behind what it is we're trying to do with our art and what it is we're trying to do with our music, and that's something I feel like, now at 29, I'm taking a lot more seriously. And something I just want to continue to develop, in fostering that sound, but pushing the art form forward in a way that it feels genuine and feels connected to a source that I've studied from, that I've learned from. And
Great.
Well,
Christian, speak.
You are beyond connected. No, and I'm just going to take the moment just to be real about, what a pleasure it was to have you in our band and in our environment, for the time that you were there, the things that you contributed. Braxton is a person that would step on the bandstand every night and you were going to hear completely new things, new ideas. He was always working, and we would always tease because you go on the road, and for trumpeters, they don't practice in the hotel room because they have to have some energy because the instrument is such most guys don't shed a lot in the hotel.
The way you play, bro.
But what I always loved about the time that we spent together also was that this was a person that spent every day, every moment that he could sharpening himself.
Yeah.
And, you know, in terms of what that really means for younger people that are coming up, that are watching this and that will watch this in the future, you know, if you're a person that is interested in getting to a level like a person like a Braxton Cook, it means that you have to fully commit and put the time and the work in. This is a person that's going to wake up every day. And if he's like, you know, I was able to catch a little bit of the concert and I heard him singing somewhere in between. And, you know, you can't play such incredible things on the alto saxophone and then switch and grab a guitar and sing your heart out, you know, and I say that to say that, yes, that you could say that this is talent. We get that word gets thrown around a lot. You know, obviously, Mrs. Cruz, you brought up genius, but, you know, you're also looking at a person that is walking into that energy, but it's because of the time and the work and the detail. And so for anyone that's watching this in this moment, this is really what I want to leave you with, is that Charlie Parker, just like a person like a Braxton Cook, these are people that committed themselves to the process and the work that is requisite to be those ones that you hear about in these spaces. And if that is something that you are interested for yourself, it means that you have to work.
Thank you. Because I do think genius is 90% work. Or they have this relationship between that and sweat and brilliance. So let me just say, I think I have to turn it over now, back over to Monique, but I want to thank you both and say how very much I enjoyed this conversation.
Appreciate you.
It's fun. It's fun, you know? And I believe that, you know, that's essential for all of us, you know, all the time.
Yes,
to enjoy life and vote.
Everybody vote.
Go vote.
Thank you so much. The chat is going crazy. You know how it is when the conversation gets juicy, then the comments and the chat, and a lot of people are asking that might have joined in the conversation in process, will it be aired again? And so we're assuring everyone that just go to the Harlem Stage YouTube page, and you can see Braxton's solo concert as well as this entire conversation. 2 points that I just want to lift up that really resonated with me, and that is, although I've heard you talk about genre blind music or your three-year residency at Harlem Stage, Christian, when you said that all forms are valued equally, that was so powerful when you think about how much we have to advocate and defend the culture and the genius. So that value, putting that value, and this is a time for that. And also moving through the world with dignity, acknowledging the legacy of genius that comes through the culture. And you both embody that. So one thing that we're doing for 2021, and we didn't get a chance to really talk about how you're navigating the virtual world and what you guys are up to, but one of the things that we're doing are creating a series of artist-to-artist conversations. So I'm gonna put you on the spot right now, both of you, to say we wanna see you in 2021 and partnering with us. I mean, you're part of the Harlem Stage family, because these conversations are important and they're rich and they need to be documented, just like you talked about the book that people reference from how many years ago. People are going to be looking back at this, like what happened in 2020 with these incredible artists. So as we move into 2021, we know that we're going to open up the gatehouse at some point, but we still will be in a virtual space for some time. So we want to put that invitation out to you now so you can start thinking about that. Who do you want to talk to? And there's so many people in both of your networks that we'd love to connect with. So do you accept?
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to when the doors open. You already know, I'm like, I got dibs.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, man, please put me on the.
Right. We have some things we're cooking. So thank you again for everyone who has joined this conversation. Thank you, Braxton, for that incredible concert and this conversation. Thank you, Christian. And of course, our wonderful fearless leader and her experience, her history, and her knowledge that really brings and moves Harlem Stage forward in a way that we need. So thank you, Pat.
Thank you. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Monique. Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll see you all soon.
I know.